So folks, one more time, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. You are at the Deb Silver talk. I'm going to just remove the share screen. Welcome into this space. I'm just going to start my video for a moment so that if folks don't have a floaty voice, they can see who's chatting with them. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We'd like to invite you to set your Zoom settings to speaker, which is in the top right of your Zoom screen. And if you have any questions at all throughout the discussion, to please use the chat functions or the Q&A at the bottom toolbar. It looks like we've got both available for you today. And you're welcome to pose questions in the chat or the Q&A throughout the course of the discussion. We're going to be answering them towards the last 15, 20 minutes of our time together today. And I'll just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Amy Henny-Brown. I'm an assistant professor with the University of the Fraser Valley. And on behalf of the School of Creative Arts, I just want to welcome everybody into this space today and offer an acknowledgement that we are currently on what is, what has been, and what always will be Soptamo. I'm delighted to be able to be a host and a guest in this space today. And I want to invite everybody to take a moment to really sit with the visuals that we're going to be provided through Deb's talk that started us off today, and to be able to use those visuals as we chat with Deb to find grounding and find footing in what can be one of the rainiest seasons that we hold near and dear. I also wanted to just take a moment to introduce Adrienne Fast, who's going to be guiding us through the conversation today. Hi, Adrienne. It's so lovely to be able to share the talk with you today.
Nice to see you.
You as well. And I think what I'm going to do now, folks, I'm going to mute myself and take away my video, and I'll let the folks who are going to be doing the interview take over from here. So thank you so much.
Super. Thank you, Amy. Yes, just a brief hello from myself. My name is Adrienne Fast, and I'm the Curator of Art and Visual Culture at the Reach Gallery Museum here in Abbotsford. And I'm delighted to be sitting down virtually with artist Deb Silver, who currently has a solo exhibition on display at the Reach titled Feet Deep in Wet Earth and Watery Pools. Deb Silver is a Fraser Valley-based photographer, printmaker, and sculptor who holds an MFA from Emily Carr University of Art and Design and a BFA from the University of the Fraser Valley. She uses processes tied to changing ecosystems to create analog photographs that celebrate the interdependent relationships between water, root systems, lichen, and fungi that create healthy, complex environments. Silver's work has been exhibited at the University of the Fraser Valley, at the Reach Gallery Museum, at the Polygon Gallery in North Vancouver, and last year in 2021, she was a finalist for the Philip P. Lind Emerging Artist Prize, organized by the Polygon Gallery in North Vancouver. So welcome, Deb. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good. So I just want to dive in and start talking about the work that's on display and your process and sort of your thinking behind while you're making things. So one of the things that I find really interesting about your work, especially the work that's on display right now at the Reach, is that you're often trying to find ways to combine Coast Salish knowledge and teachings with scientific reports and evidence. So I'm curious to know, what do you see, what is the relationship between those two sources of knowledge in your mind, and why do you think it's important that you use both of them in your work?
Yeah, I find when I'm working with culture, beliefs, values, morals, and teachings, there will always be this opposition because it's through our own individual lens. And if I say I believe rooted people speak to me because I feel there's a great chance someone is going to think I'm crazy, right? Like, so if I say, plants and trees can communicate with one another, and there's scientific documents to prove this, and hours of research to prove it, then we'll like simply rewording it, right? Rewording the rewording what I believe to be true and holding a scientific document, it makes me look a lot less out there. And in all honesty, for me to continue to believe what my ancestors have taught me, I don't need the scientific research. Um, but I felt it gave me more credibility in an academic system.
So it's almost like a defense, like it's you're sort of predicting what the pushback is going to be. And so if you incorporate or include that research in your work, then it's like you've preempted the possible critique.
Yeah, and it's a bit heartbreaking that I need that research, right?
Yeah.
Because I can't explain how I feel, and I feel how I feel plants and trees in a way, and I always find like if I'm going to an opening or I'm at one of my shows, there's always someone coming up to me like saying, "Hey, this is what I felt," and um, I felt that pushback from from my peers when I
Yeah.
began this research. When I said plants can communicate with individuals, there was a pushback, and um, I think I really got to credit Grace, my instructor at the time, for saying just go for it. This is what you believe. This is what you know to be true for you. Go for it. And and then I just thought, that research would be beneficial, and the people saying like this is outrageous,
Right.
they kind of shut up. They were like, okay, so you got this document, you got other people saying it's true, and they have a PhD, right? So
Does it really, it just thinking about what you've just explained, does that play into sort of who you're anticipating your audience is going to be with your work? If you said it's kind of heartbreaking that you even need these defenses, if can you envision a work that would be only for your community, your ancestors, that wouldn't require scientific knowledge? Or is it really when you're sort of dealing with the art world or the academic world that you feel like that kind of research and scientific buttressing that's when it's necessary?
yeah, for sure. Definitely in the academic and the art world, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't until recently that oral research or oral stories became credible, right?
Right.
So it's I think we're getting there, but it's still got a ways to go. Yeah, sure.
I also just wanted to, I wrote down, I really love, I've never heard this phrase before, rooted people, to describe it. And I think a lot of this is tied up in the language in English, how we talk about plants and trees as sort of inanimate objects, but thinking of them as sentient beings, which is seems such an important part of your life. If you can use a different phrase, if you can use rooted people, it helps remind you to keep those channels open at all times. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, I prefer rooted people over more than human. I don't
Okay.
I don't understand that personally,
Okay.
but yeah, it does. They're living beings, right? When we have a plant in our house, we say it died.
Right.
So it very much is alive, and
Mhm.
it responds to you.
Yep.
So why not treat it with respect? It's alive. It's there. It's helping in
Right.
whatever way that it's helping. Yeah.
So we've already touched on this, that something that's very important in not only your work, but I think in your life and in your entire system of belief is the concept of plant communication. And can you talk a little bit about who are some of the authors or the scholars or the elders or the ancestors who have guided your thinking in coming to a greater understanding of plant communication?
Yeah. Um, I think plant communication is it's definitely the foundation of my art practice. Rooted people communicating with one another, with human beings. It's important to my work because I think my work is very simple. personally. And I just want to advocate for treating each other well, for treating other living beings, plants and animals, treat them well and with respect. And I hope it's more difficult to treat trees poorly if you know they have ways to sense what is being done to them. And, um, if a bug's eating their leaves or if neighboring trees are being cut down, they know because they can send each other warnings to one another. I get this world we live in is in it's different, right? But we can always try to be better, be more respectful towards plants today than we were yesterday. And there's always room for improvement and growth. Being respectful is one teaching from Coast Salish, Coast Salish culture that's so important. And I do read a lot of scientific research, and those documents they're not the first thing I reach for when I begin a project. If I learn something new from Coast Salish knowledge carrier Carrie Lynn Victor, who is basically my go-to uh, resource. I don't really like calling her a resource, but with my art practice, she kind of is.
Yeah.
I often start with the Coast Salish knowledge, then I find a way to back it with Western science. I don't.
So,
Oh,
so go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
I don't start with like Monica Gangliano's research or Suzanne Simard's research. I was standing in our kitchen when having a conversation with Carrie Lynn, and the idea of feet deep in wet earth and watery pools came to me. Then I began researching lichen, and then going to like ecologists Suzanne Simard, Monica Gangliano, and Peter, I think his name's Wallabin, the Hidden Life of Trees author,
Yep.
and Stephen Bonar, the Secret Teaching of Plants. And the title from Feet Deep in Wet Earth came from Bonar's book.
So I think that's one of the things that strikes me about your work and your practice is that it starts with like relationship. It starts with conversation. It starts with just spending time, and it's not like now you don't have a timer that's like 9 o'clock. Now I'm going to start making artwork. It's that it bubbles up from just your life and the conversations that you have around your kitchen table or whatever. But then I find it so interesting that you start with these Coast Salish teachings or knowledge, and with that beginning, then explore other avenues, explore other kinds of knowledge, and take what's useful from those other sources of knowledge and use it, even if it is, as you say, perhaps to defend yourself against potential critiques. But it was Carrie Lynn who first told you or explained to you that there was this stallo practice of using lichen to make plant-based dyes. Is that right?
Yeah, it was.
She says she probably had no idea when she mentioned this that it was going to involve so many hours of work and research and trial and error on your part. Can you talk just a little bit, just describe for the people who are watching and listening, what was the process for you from this idea, okay, lichen can be used to make dyes, to then what you actually went through to find and create and make the dye that worked for your project?
Um, the process.
Did it take, like, I know that you went out and you had to harvest at different times of year in different locations to try to find the right kind of lichens, and then you have to try, like, do you boil it or do you have to treat it in some other way? How do you get the actual dye that you want out of it?
You do boil it. Well, there were so many different times. Sometimes I left it outside to dry out and soaked the lichen overnight, boiled for an hour, dyed for several hours. That process changed every time I tried to dye photos. So sometimes I didn't let the lichen dry out. Others, I didn't bring the lichen solution to a boil. Um, just made sure it was really hot water.
Mhm.
And sometimes I left the photos in the dye solution for days. I think the ones I'm showing at the Reach right now, I left them in the solution for 4 days,
Wow.
and they became too fragile.
Mm.
And I think you could see that when you look up close, but I haven't mastered the process yet. Uh, it's really tricky for me. Um, but I did. I tried dyeing. I tried harvesting lichen in the dead of winter, like walking through a foot deep of snow looking for lichen, and then I harvested lichen in the middle of the summer. And what's weird is it doesn't matter um, how I process it, I guess, or
Hmm.
no, when I harvest it, really, because I took lichen from the same bag and processed it and got this really nice orange.
Okay.
And then from the same bag a week later, a completely different color. So I don't know I don't know what I'm doing yet. Really.
But that's to me again is also part of like, the what we see in the exhibition space is a finished product. It's a photograph on the wall. But what I find fascinating is this, like all of the process that goes into it beforehand. Like, so not only the conversations with Carrie Lynn, but then also the research for other sort of ecologists. And then this, what I see is a very kind of practical scientific kind of trial and error approach where that lichen has been used by the Stalo people to create dyes, but perhaps what has been lost or is not accessible as much as exactly the techniques of that, exactly like, the recipe. Well, you can't just look it up and say boiled for this long, etc. So then it becomes a process by which you are trying to maybe not exactly recreate what was done in the past, but find something that works for this current and modern project. But the only way to do that is by trying all these and just like try what if we boil it first, what if we dry it first, like what, like to kind of come up with all these ideas that might affect the final finished color. All of that to me is like the really interesting, like that to me, that the art practice is fascinating. What we see at the end is just a photograph on the wall, but we can't follow you around for a year and video you doing all these things and then put that up at the exhibition. But in a way I kind of wish that we could. But and I find that interesting that you say that it's not finished yet. It's like do you think that you still want to try like more projects dyeing photographs with lichen or different, are there other kinds of materials besides lichen that you think you might want to try?
Yeah, I want to try mushrooms.
Okay.
There's this Facebook group page that I'm on, and it talks a lot about dyeing with mushrooms and dyeing with lichen. And when I went on there and I really looked at the comments, and there's this one woman who I used her. I think her name's Alyssa Allen, and I've used her paper, um, or an article she wrote to help me through to actually get a successful dye, because it was mayhem. And
Right.
uh, with that article, it helped me achieve a dye, but I didn't get what I wanted. And it's it really is like going to new places and harvesting different kinds of lichen. And if I go up high, in the mountains and harvest lichen, like even if it's old man's beard, the chemical makeup of it is going to be way different than what I would get, outside my door, if there is any. So it looks the same, but it's not the same. And
Well, and I kind of like, to me, that also, when you're talking about treating plants and trees and the natural world with respect as equals, um, in a way, I find that very interesting. It might be very frustrating for you as an experience, but the fact that you can't really dictate to the lichen or the mushroom what it's going to do, that it's almost like that is like that plant is an equal partner with you as and if you can't fight against it, you have to find a way to work with it. And that if you otherwise you're just going to end up being frustrated, but that it's sort of you're relinquishing some of the agency of the artist in a way that I think really is in agreement with Coast Salish teachings, and inviting the lichen or the other plants to be a part of the creative process. Do you see it that way?
Sure. I guess if I'm gonna have a partner in my art career, I would prefer it to be nature
Yeah.
instead of a person. There's, you know, it's, they're always
So
gonna, or nature's always gonna be right, but yeah,
that's true too. And
yeah,
if you're not getting the result that you want from it, that you know that there's something about your approach and your process that needs to be reconsidered, because as you say, nature is never wrong. It knows what it's doing. So then it's just we're asking the wrong thing, or we're asking in the wrong way.
yeah, for sure. And it's always my approach, right?
Mhm.
Um, I found if I was really annoyed that, I spend it 2 or 3 hours worth trying to dye one photo, it seemed to take longer.
Mhm.
And it was when I started to appreciate the smell and the time, the quality of time with each photo, that things seemed to go a lot smoother. And that, I guess, with any kind of art, that's the way it goes. If you go in frustrated, you're gonna leave frustrated, right? So yeah.
I remember reading that in your thesis paper about like that, like uh, very much needing to start with an appropriate energy, an appropriate sort of like calmness and good energy, that you're not going to get a good result unless you go into it with good energy. And that's a difficult thing to reconcile with. Often we're trying to churn out product because we have an assignment or we have a deadline or things like that. But I appreciate, especially for your MA project, that you let it take the time that it had to take. I'm sure the deadlines were looming in your head at some times, but that knowing that if you force it, it's going to come out badly. So in the same way that you have to respect the choices made by the plants, their agency in the process, but also if you approach with a bad energy or a bad reasoning, if you have a bad motivation, then things are that negative feeling will also come out in the both in the image. It may not be satisfying, or that it just won't work. It's tricky. So I think it's a great thing to try to remember. It reminds us that things take the time that they take, and we human beings want to make things go on our schedule, but it often is counterproductive.
For sure.
Now, both of the series in the exhibition, so it's both your MFA project for Emily Carr, which is where the exhibition takes its title from, Feet Deep in Wet Earth and Watery Pools. And then we also have a selection, a kind of a reconfigured version of your BFA project, Their Words Echo Through My Core. And both of these are photo-based projects, obviously. And that has led some people to describe you as a photo-based artist. Or in fact, there was an article in the Abbey News that I sent you recently that called you a nature photographer. And I just want to point out that in your practice, you also work across a variety of other media. You work in sculpture, you work in printmaking, you've worked in painting. Can you talk a little bit about what those different media mean to you, or what are sort of the strengths or weaknesses of those media? Like, how do you know when you're approaching a project that this has to be a painting project or this should be a sculpture? Does it just seem natural, or do you have sort of ways of thinking about what is expressible in each of those media?
Yeah, I refuse to call myself a painter. I don't personally work in that medium.
Okay.
I'm a paint by numbers.
Okay. You're a very talented painting assistant. How about that?
Sure. But sculpture and printmaking, are skills I worked very hard to acquire. Um, Not to say I don't work hard when I'm painting, but that's not my artist. That's someone else's. So if, later down the road I'm known only as a printmaker, that's a dream come true for me.
Yeah.
If my work in a my work is telling a story, then the medium I feel like is the tone, right? And so much of our communication is nonverbal, and I feel like that's how that's how plants are too. And there are ways to manipulate with photography, and I try to distort the image as little as possible, but there's always, some form of manipulation there, and there's no getting around that. And with printmaking, it's just so much fun, and it's so difficult. During my BFA, I realized that I chose mediums a lot of people struggle with, and I like being good at things people have a hard time with. Uh, so I understood printmaking right away, and I never considered myself good at drawing or a skilled drawer. But with copper, it just seemed like working backwards, and I understood that, and it came really easy to me. And it's just such a joy to get a good print. Um, but as far as like each project, I think each project requires and demands a different medium, and that I need to find a way to make it look good. And with their words echo through my core and feet deep in wet earth and watery pools, I had to use photography. Um, and I don't know why really. It seemed a bit more true, I guess, for me to use my camera than to try and draw something. And I did do a print series, I think in 2019, um, just to the sorry honor the people who've helped me so much along the way, and that I felt comfortable using printmaking. I was really pleased with the end result of those works. But
And is there a particular type of project or idea or process where you really feel like this is where sculpture should be playing a major role? Like, what is it? Like, what sorts of things do you feel like is better to say in sculpture, or is that just a stupid question?
no, it's not. I have no
Okay.
idea. I think it might be the time of year that I'm working, actually.
Oh yeah.
Like thinking about it, because when I did the project for the Reach and I made those bleachers,
Yeah.
I did that in the summer.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So working outside.
yeah, and working with film, I like to take photos in the winter, in the fall.
Okay.
So it just might be a time of
New
year.
time of year thing. Hey, that's cool. Yeah. So for anyone who might not be familiar, Deb's talking about an exhibition we had in 2019 that was called Lee Set, We Transform It, which was a group exhibition of 14 Indigenous artists and scholars, one of whom was Deb. And you did this fantastic set of bleachers, exactly that looked like the risers or seating that you would have in a public event, and then wrapped it with this very ghost-like white fabric, so that you could see the shapes underneath, but it was just the suggestion of and how the sheet sort of created this barrier of like, it's there, but it's not for you to see necessarily. And it had that great reflection on the floor that also had like a sort of a ghost-like reflection. It was a really cool piece. But that was my first sort of introduction to working with you as an artist. And so it always like, it kind of, I find it funny that I keep seeing you referred to as a photographer. And it's like, well, yeah, but also other things. But yeah, that makes sense, especially Is your sculpture largely in large scale? Do you do small sculptures, or do you like to build big? If you're going to build it big.
Uh, any size, really.
Okay.
It's funny because I don't build well. I insist on continuing to work with wood and build things, and my partner jokes about having an exhibition, in 10 years or something of all the things that I've built, and it's just these poorly put together wobbly tables and
Well, you tell her that when that exhibition is ready, we'll show it at the Reach. Okay. It'll be great. So you mentioned one of the things that I also read in your thesis, you mentioned that for the two projects that we're showing right now, they kind of had to be photography because they were more true perhaps than drawing something. But originally, I was surprised to read that originally you did plan to do feet deep in wet earth and watery pools as a set of copper plate etchings. And then you changed your mind. Maybe you've already answered this. Is it because you felt that because you're dealing also with the process of licen-based dyes, that obviously that lends itself. I mean, I suppose you could dye copper plate etchings with lichen dye, but you wanted to work with images that were already sort of truthful photographic images rather than something completely created by your imagination.
yeah, it demanded a bit more accuracy, I guess, with the imagery. And I I kind of struggled with the print studio at Emily Carr. They didn't have aquatint there, the dust
Yep.
that um, I learned to do printmaking with, and I realize how stubborn I am now. Like if I learn something one way, that's the way I want to do it.
Okay.
And I took 4 years of printmaking with Davida, and I just couldn't see myself getting exactly what I wanted
Right.
in a different studio.
Right.
So even when I worked with printmaking, I went back to UFE, which I'm super grateful for them opening the studio and allowing me that space and time. Um, but I struggled with some of this stuff at Emily Carr. They didn't have all the tricky tools that Davida made herself there. So
Right.
yeah.
It's interesting to me that your love of printmaking, because I love printmaking also, but it's very much when I'm thinking about the process of trial and error that you used in trying to figure out how you were going to get the image quality that you wanted with the lichen dyes. I think I see a printmaking very much in a similar kind of vein. You talk about like the joy of getting a good print, where like each time you're doing the plate, you're running it through the press, you're doing all the different processes. But every printmaker that I know talks about like when you pull the print off, you don't know exactly what you're going to get, and so it's like you keep trying different experimental, like, well, what if I do it this way? What if I do it that way? And then run it through and see what the result is. And so it's all, as you say, it's like working backwards. Once you have the product that you want, then you have to just replicate that process that you did to get there. But you might have to try multiple different directions in order before you get the end result that you like. So it's interesting. I see that there's this trial and error, like figuring out hard things that are hard, like difficult for other people, and like that satisfaction of when you finally get a result that you like. That there's this crossover that's between the way you process the photographs and the way you work in printmaking. I think you just like figuring out hard things. Yeah,
I do.
it is satisfying.
I like solving puzzles and problems. I really enjoy it, um, which could be a
So
problem itself.
as long as like I really I embrace the idea that I like it when artists are trying things without knowing for sure if it's going to work, and sometimes it's very disastrous. Sometimes you have no end result, but those are the artists that I find most interesting to talk to and whose work to see, is that like they're always pushing to like a little bit, like, what if I did this? What if I tried something else? And it's always for them, I think they do it, and I think you do this to satisfy yourself. And then everyone else is like, oh, that's so cool. But you're really doing it to try to satisfy your own, like your stuff. You want to learn how to do this thing. You want to make it, you want to see if you can make it do what you want it to do.
Yeah, exactly. And that is something I came to realize not too long ago, that I like to figure something out and be good at it, and then I'm over it. I want to move.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
like
is the challenge. It's like, if you get really good at it, then there's no questions left. Then you've answered all the questions, and then you don't need to go back to that process. You need to find something else then that asks you questions, that allows you to ask questions.
yeah. Fortunately, I don't think I'll ever be really, really good, like enough to turn my back on photography and be like, I already know.
I know
Like,
photography. That's it. Photography's
no
over.
problems. Let's see
So
what we got.
when you do work with photography, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're always working with analog processes. So like the photographs we have in the exhibition are silver gelatin prints. I have to ask all photographers this question, or people who do photography, is what are your feelings around digital photography? Is that something that you would ever consider using in your practice, and why or why not?
Um, if I'm ever in a position financially to buy a $5,000 camera,
Okay.
every, like so I can keep up with technology, I might consider switching to digital, but I doubt it. I've worked with digital, and I can produce photos and edit in Photoshop and print them off on a printer, no problem. But there's something so satisfying about seeing an image come to be in the darkroom, and it's it's just that weight, right? And you have to work so hard for it, and there's no auto set on my camera, and I feel like that's that's so
It's a different process. Like, but for you, the thrill of discovering answers to questions in the process, not to say that digital photography and, as you say, like editing digital photographs couldn't also be a process of learning and answering questions, but it's a different set of questions entirely, I think.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I I enjoy my camera, I think, too much to trade it in, and I have researched digital cameras, I think, for about 6 months now.
Okay.
And I've tried talking myself into going digital more than once because I feel like I would be a really good wedding photographer,
Okay.
and I would make bank, in the
Yeah.
summer. Just kidding.
Oh,
But
hey, it's especially if you're trying to pay for a $5,000 camera. Like, I think this is really useful, especially for any like young art students who are listening to, is that I think sometimes, as art historians, we think that artists are choosing anything that they want, and that anything's available under the sun, that they can choose to paint in whatever media or work in whatever way. But a lot of these decisions are made for practical purposes, like access to a printing studio, for a print studio that has the equipment that you are comfortable working with. Like, that either makes something possible or makes it impossible, and having access to equipment really, it defines a lot of artists' practices, for better or for worse. So this is a related question then. So sort of about whether you would embrace digital at any time. The other thing about your photographs is obviously that they're in black and white, and I think that's tied to the analog processes that you use, like silver gelatin prints. But sometimes when I look at an artwork or a series like the ones that are on display right now, I try to imagine, what if one thing about it was different? One significant thing was different, and how would that change my response to the work? So when I go down into the exhibition space, I look at your photographs and I try to imagine, what if they were in color? What if, because we've got these beautiful, lush scenes of the forest that are so intense and so layered, but they're in black and white. And then I think, if they were in color, would it be too overwhelming? Would it be too, I don't know. I'm just wondering if you have ever considered working in color. Is this tied to your, like, the equipment that you're using, or is that something that you'd like to try in the future?
Uh, it is very much tied to the equipment I'm using, and I think everything around in the background would be dead, right? Because it's
Right,
I take pictures in the winter, but
right.
I prefer black and white because
Mhm.
it's simple.
Yeah,
Um, I find like people tend to make things harder than they actually are, and I find that really annoying. So for me, adding color to my photos would just make it more difficult.
mhm,
Um, Processing film and enlarging a negative, it's
yeah,
hard enough. Um, Getting the perfect gray and the black and the white, it's tricky. Like, why throw matching colors into the mix?
sure.
It doesn't make sense to me, and I can tell. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would enjoy that at all.
Yeah. And I don't know if, like, maybe the color would work with a different series or different subject matter, but I do find something about like when you're in the woods, even in the winters, in our territory, in our area, like things are still very green, and there's this sort of cacophony of deep green colors. It's like every green that you can possibly imagine. But what I like about your photos is that it's, as you say, it's sort of been simplified, and that it sort of boils it boils it down to use a like an analogy, but boils it down to sort of the essence of what you're talking about. The interconnectedness between the water and the root systems and the mushrooms and the fungi, as opposed to, I feel like if it was in color, I would be too distracted, I think, to focus on that message in your work. So for me, I think it works better from audience point of view, but I appreciate that it's also very much tied to, you're already trying to solve a series of very difficult questions with the processes that you have, and why add another one to the mix? If you wanted to explore color, maybe it would be a different process that doesn't have the other built-in challenges already involved.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of the end of the questions that I had prepared that I wanted to ask you, but I wanted to open up the questions to anything that has been maybe mentioned in the chat, or if anyone wants to ask any questions now. Amy, did you have anything that you wanted to add or say at this point?
Thanks, Adrienne. Actually, if it's okay, while folks are finding their way into asking their questions, we do have the chat and the Q&A open, but I was wondering if it's okay if I start with a question that I have. Okay. So Deb, I was really interested as you were talking about your mediums and how you are working between different methods of making to kind of to serve the idea best. One thing that kept coming up to mind was the idea of time. The processes that you're choosing are very labor intensive, they're very time intensive. And I'm just curious how you or if time is something that you are thinking about with your practice and like how you're building your work, if you're thinking about like short time or long time. I think this comes up for me too in taking photographs in an environment that expresses so many different kinds of time, like a forest. And I was just curious to hear more if that's something that informs the work as you're making it.
Yeah, for sure. I think at one point, um, I talk about time and honoring it. It's always going, right? And my process, no matter what I'm working with, it takes me. Seems like it takes me forever. Um, Except I think for all the photos in the exhibition right now. Um, but I feel like that it is so important, and um, it's always in the back of my mind. You know, these trees and these plants, they didn't shoot up overnight, and that I I, I feel like I said it was a way of honoring them. My process was a way of honoring their process of growing, because it could be really simple to just go out and take a digital photograph, and I've done it. I've done a digital photo series, and I considered using that when COVID first hit, but it wasn't as satisfying, and I didn't feel like it gave it everything to those plants, right? And um, it it is um, about honoring their life cycle and giving them the time that they deserve, giving them my time that they deserve, because I feel like I owe it to them simply by taking their photo. Yeah.
I I just wanted to add one thing that I really respected about you describing your process of going into the woods, and as you just described, sort of giving them the respect of your time. That you said something like, "I would never walk up to a person on the street and take their photograph without asking for permission." And so you have the same kind of attitude when you go into the forest, that you announce, you introduce yourself, you explain your intentions, that you approach your subjects with respect, because it's necessary, because that's the respectful and correct thing to do. I'm not sure that I think there are a lot of people who would take photos of people on the street without asking, first of all. And I think not a lot of people would think about applying that to non-human subjects as well. So that was something that I really admired and wanted to highlight in the exhibition.
Yeah.
We have a fairly specific question from Dan in the chat, and he's saying, as an outdoor educator, I'm always looking for ways to engage students and their creative energies with nature resources. And Dan is asking if you can share any advice on creating various colors with lichen.
Various colors. Uh, well, it's really about the lichen you harvested, right? Um, I went to the silk. Oh, I can't pronounce it. I went to the Okanagan and this Smilkmune, and I harvested um, wolf lichen, and that will that will give me a bright yellow dye. And if I have the right photos, I'm gonna dye those bright yellow. And there's an orange lichen that gives you purple. And unfortunately, I don't know the names of them, but you know, it depends on the lichen that you harvest that you're gonna get a different color. And I just happen to have old man's beard, right? It's um, abundant in uh, the Puyallup territory where I'm currently located. So it was really convenient to just, drive out, harvest some lichen, and it gave me like a brown, like a light brown, and sometimes it gave me a really dark orange. So uh, I guess
Trial and error.
you really gotta know what color you want, and then kind of do the research to figure out which lichen's going to give you that color.
I will also just jump in for a shameless plug for the Reach and mention that for many of our exhibitions, we create culture kits, sort of art making, like take and go kits for kids. So for Deb's exhibition, we have a culture kit that has all the instructions for how kids can experiment with making dyes using like what they find in the fridge. You can use like turmeric powder from your pantry, or you use beets from the fridge, and then all of the things in the kit are what you need to make a little photo transfer that's dyed with whatever dye you create. So contact the Reach if you want to order those for some of your students, Dan, and just know that they're available until the exhibition closes on May the 7th. Shameless plug. And they're free. So it's not even a plug. They're free.
No, I think that's great, Adrienne. It's nice to know that there's a way of extending the conversation into practice as well. And I really appreciate, Deb, with the the question that Dan just asked too, it reminds me of the moment in our talk where you just shared this idea of reciprocation and building relationship. And the idea that you can't always know a plant and its process until you build relationship with it. And just supporting that idea of trial and error feels really exciting. If we are allowed to rename it as like a relationship building through process. We have another question in the Q&A. This person is asking, I'd love to hear more about Deb's journey as a young artist. Was she always drawn to nature? How did your beliefs about the land evolve into what they are today?
Young artist, thank you. Um, my beliefs, I'm Coast Salish, and I wasn't, my parents were really traditional and cultural before I was born. I'm the youngest of a number of children, and by the time I came along, they were still pretty cultural, but it wasn't something I really grew up in. Um, After like 10, but those beliefs, their beliefs, were very much instilled in me. I would say since the beginning, um, and that importance and the respect for not only other people but for animals and plants and trees. It I want to say that it's just in us as Coast Salish people that we know that Saltamuc is a part of us and we're connected to it. And I guess it evolved to what it is today because I'm very cultural and I practice ceremony uh, as much as possible. And that interconnectedness is very much um, spoken about on the daily in ceremony and in my home. It's so important that we continue to believe in our way of life. So I feel like I'm still evolving and still growing, and I still know very little. Um, but it's for me, it's important to be willing to be willing to learn, and that yeah, I, I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but
Great.
I think that's a great answer to the question. Um, well, maybe we have time for one more question that I'm going to pull from the chat. It's a quick one, and folks, I'm sorry if you've asked a longer or a very specific question. It might be an opportunity to touch base with folks at the Reach, but maybe to wrap us up, we've got a question of if you have your own garden, which inspires your artwork.
no, I don't. Um, I
You've
can't
got
grow.
you've got you've got Saltamuc. You've got, nature is growing its garden all around you.
Yeah, got a bunch of blackberry bushes in the back, but oh, and raspberries. I guess I do, but it doesn't really inspire me. It's kind of work.
I also am without garden, and my partner thinks of gardening as work. So, no, I'm very much in league. Well, folks, we're about to hit the 2 p.m. mark. I just wanted to take a moment to thank both Deb Silver and Adrienne Fast for hosting such an engaging conversation. And folks are really mirroring that within the chat. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And I suppose I'll hand this back to Adrienne and Deb if there's anything you'd like to sign off with or anything you'd like to say in closing.
I just want to say thank you to Deb for trusting me and the Reach to show your work. And it's been already the response from audiences has been so overwhelmingly positive. And I can see the good work that your work is doing for our visitors. And I just want to say I'm incredibly grateful. Thank you for letting us show your work.
Thank you for showing it.
Anytime, anytime.
Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. And please look forward to another talk towards the end of March. We're so glad you could join us today. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.